Hello and welcome to another very interesting discussion in social psychology. Today we are going to look at attitudes. It's one of the key things that we all talk about. And so in this session, we are going to look at what the concept means, define attitudes. What are the components of attitudes? What are the processes we use to form the attitudes we have? And what are the functions of the attitudes we have? Right? The world in which we live, we don't just glaze through. We form impressions, as we've seen in previous sessions. We evaluate people. We evaluate situations. We are going to look at how we do these evaluations that inform the attitudes we have. Attitude to work, attitude to life, attitude to this and that, right? So besides definition, we'll look at the components, the processes of attitude formation, how we can assess people's attitudes, the functions of attitudes, and any possible biases in attitude measurement. And for your discussion on attitudes, you will be required to read chapter 5 of the required text. So what are attitudes? We say that an attitude is an evaluation of an object along a positive or negative dimension. And when we talk of an object could be an inanimate object, it could be a human object, it could be a situation. So perhaps I can ask you, what is your attitude towards an interchange? It's an inanimate object. Would you want to use that route or not? What is your attitude towards your wife? What is your attitude towards this politician? What is your attitude towards politics? Right? So any and everything you encounter, you are evaluating it. So we say attitudes are learned. We are not born with the attitudes we have, we learn them. That guides our thoughts, feelings, and actions towards specific others and objects. The evaluation you make along a positive or negative light will determine how you relate with the person. So what are attitudes made up of? We say attitudes have three basic components: the cognitive, affective, and cognitive or behavioral components. Right? The cognitive component, cognition, consists of your thoughts, your beliefs about an attitude object. So what do you think about me? What are your beliefs about God? Your beliefs about the Ghanaian education system? What you think about this? That is the cognitive component. Then we have the affective component. What do you feel about bread? What do you feel about alcohol? What you feel about something, your emotions, is a component. Then how you actually act towards something would also depict your attitude. And these three components are related. They are interrelated. What you think about something influences how you would feel about it, and it would subsequently influence your behavior, your action towards it. If I think well of you, I'll feel well about you, and I'll perhaps most likely act well towards you. If I don't think well of you, when I see you, I may get angry, I will not feel well towards you, and I will not act well towards you. I would either avoid you or act in a way that may not be pleasant. Right? So these three components are very necessary and they are related. But in every situation, an attitude may exhibit more of one of the components than the other. So we can say that certain attitudes are cognitively based. Some are affectively based, and some are cognitively based. So to the extent that a person's evaluation of an object is much more predominantly based on cognition, then we'll say that that attitude is cognitively based. So for instance, you want to buy a vehicle, and the main reasons, justification for buying the vehicle is its durability, is its cost, is its speed. You are making objective assessments of the vehicle. Then we can say that your attitude towards that vehicle is cognitively based. But your attitude could also be affectively based. You are not thinking perhaps of the fuel consumption of the vehicle. You are not thinking of the speed of the vehicle. You are only thinking of the fact that this is a very beautiful car or vehicle. This is a flashy one. This is the one that everybody is going to be happy at that I have. So it's just your emotions, how you feel about it, and not its effectiveness, right? Its durability. Then we would say that your attitude towards that vehicle is affectively based. Then we can also say attitudes can be behaviorally based, behavior-based attitudes. You are not really thinking through it or feeling anything about it. You just do it because you have to do it. Like we say, sometimes a man has to do what a man has to do. Not because he thinks it's what is right to do or he feels it's what is right to do. He just acts. If you have that attitude, then we say that your attitude is behavior-based. So in many situations, an attitude would lean towards one of these three, but there will be elements of all of the others in whatever attitude that you hold. How are attitudes formed? What is the process? The attitude you have gained over a process, and you still gain, the process is still ongoing throughout your lifetime. What is the process like? We say that attitudes are learned. We are not born with the attitudes we have. We learn them. And two processes have been identified in the attitude formation process. The social learning process, which suggests that attitudes are learned through personal experience and through socialization. And our lecture or discussion on socialization is very critical to understanding how attitudes are formed. And if you've just forgotten or have not looked at it, perhaps you would want to go and look at a session again on socialization to see how humans are socialized and apply that to what we are going to discuss in here. So we say that attitudes are learned through classical conditioning, learning based on association. So you learn, you come to see that when this variable is present, that is also likely to follow. Let me give a few examples. Often in Ghana, when it's about to rain and there is a lot of wind, what do you often expect to follow? That the lights will go out, right? So once you see the wind blowing and there's the expectation of a heavy rain, you start to perhaps look out for your lamps because you know that this is likely to be followed by lights out. So before a rain would come that is learning based on association. So you learn not to go out of home at that point in time, perhaps, right? So you develop a certain attitude towards something, towards somebody, towards some place, because over time you have learned to put certain signals together. Your attitude towards things can also be based on instrumental conditioning, learning based on reinforcement. So when you express the right views, you are applauded, right? When you express the wrong views, you are rebuked or insulted. So you learn to say the things that may be politically correct in certain contexts so people will applaud you. So your attitude towards things like, say, homosexuality may be based on learning, based on reinforcement, because you know that in our context, our society frowns on homosexuality. You know perhaps not to come out openly to say that you are one. But if you find yourself in a context where homosexuality is legal, then your attitude may be different from the attitude you may hold in these parts, right? Then your attitude is also learned based on observation and imitation. What the significant others around you exhibit would influence what you would feel towards crime, what you feel towards violence, whether you be prejudiced or not. Recently, the President of America has asked that some persons from certain states in the world cannot come to the US. And there are all kinds of views about this. There are those who are in agreement with this position, and there are those who are saying that this is discriminatory and this is prejudice. Whether you discriminate or you be prejudiced is based on the significant others you have been exposed to. Then attitude can also be learned through direct instructions, where people's parents, teachers, peers tell you, do this, don't do that, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. If you are from a very religious home, say a Muslim, for instance, your attitude towards prayer is dependent on the socialization you have received, where you have been told that at various points of time in the day, you have to pray. So you develop that attitude towards prayer based on your religious background. So attitudes are learned through socialization and through the channels of direct instructions, observation and imitation, reinforcement, and association. But you can also learn through personal experience. And it says that the best teacher is experience, right? The things you have experienced yourself tend to influence your attitude a lot more than perhaps what others tell you. For instance, you may not believe in some religious experience, say the speaking of tongues. So when people are speaking in tongues, for instance, you may think that they are just lying or pretending. But perhaps when you yourself have your own religious experience where you have spoken in tongues, then you may now have a different conviction and say that it's real. Then your attitude towards it may become stronger and much more resistant to change. So in other words, I'm saying that your attitudes are strong when you have actually had them through personal experience instead of through observation of others. What functions do attitudes serve? We'll consider a number of them. We say that attitudes serve a knowledge function, right? Attitudes provide us with a frame of reference for organizing our world so that it makes sense. Your attitude towards colors, your attitude towards food, your attitude towards people informs the way you think, feel, and behave. So there is a frame of reference that you refer to. When I meet these people, how should I behave? When I meet royalty, how must I behave? So there's a stock of knowledge from which you draw from to know how to behave. Our attitudes help us give expression to our central values. As for me, this is what I believe. As for me, these are my values. As for me, this is what I enjoy doing. As for me, I am this and I am that. I believe in this, I don't believe in that. As you give expression to these, you are demonstrating your attitude towards these things. Right? Then we say that our attitudes also help us maintain our self-esteem, make us feel good about yourself. Personally, you perhaps will start off by saying, personally, I don't believe in abortion. I don't believe in this. I don't like corruption. I cannot stand lies, right? And as you suggest that these are your attitudes towards these things, you try to boost your self-esteem, putting yourself on a certain pedestal. So actually, the attitudes we have help us to boost our self-esteem. They also serve an ego defensive function, where you try to protect yourself from unwanted information. So somebody tells you, you are a lazy person, and you say, well, that's your opinion. I don't see myself as lazy. So you can have that kind of attitude of, I don't care. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I don't care what anybody feels. This is what I feel. This is what makes me comfortable, just to keep your ego intact and prevent you from the unpleasant truths about yourself, because nobody tends to like negative information about themselves. Attitudes help to create positive impressions, expressing the right views, the right behavior, so others will see you in a positive light. Then again, we say that the attitudes we have help us develop positive attitudes towards objects or people that we like. Those who reward us, we tend to have positive attitudes towards us. Those who don't reward us, who punish us, we have negative attitudes towards us. So our attitudes are utilitarian. They serve adjustment functions. For instance, two of your parents, the person who is very caring, affectionate, you may like, perhaps your mother. The parent that disciplines you, which you see discipline as negative or punishes you, you may not like. And most often, it tends to be the father who tends to discipline. So we use our attitude to serve certain functions for us. How do you measure people's attitudes? In Ghana, we talk of attitude towards corruption, attitudes towards time, attitude towards work. How do you know people's attitude towards corruption? People's attitude towards time? How are attitudes measured? In social psychology, there are several strategies, and we can use the Likert scale. It's one of the scales where items are placed on a questionnaire to be either favorable or unfavorable, and people are asked to tick what their opinions are. And all of these are put together to cumulatively assess what people's attitudes are. So for instance, I can put out a statement that says that the University of Ghana is the best university in Ghana, right? So I ask you to determine whether this is highly favorable or unfavorable, or whether you are not sure. And wherever you place your assessment will determine what people really think, what people's attitudes are towards the University of Ghana. Again, we can measure attitudes using the bipolar scale. And this is a scale that will have two ends of a continuum, and you have to select along the continuum, along the line, where your views are. It's similar to, say, a thermometer, or you going to see a medical doctor who wants to assess your level of pain. And so the doctor says, on a scale of 0 to 10, can you tell me what your pain is? Where 0 is the least pain or no pain, and 10 is the highest pain. So if you tell your doctor, I think my pain is at 9, he gives an assessment of how much pain you're experiencing. If you say 1, then he knows what to say. So the same way, we are able to measure people's attitudes on this bipolar scale. So for instance, you put out an information that the education system in Ghana, the standards in the education system in Ghana have fallen drastically. On a scale of 0 to 10, where would you put the standard of education? On this scale, depending on the answers people give, we'll know what people's attitudes are towards our educational system. Then we say that you can also measure people's attitudes by how readily accessible these attitudes come to mind. So if I ask a question, the speed with which you give an answer will let me know whether you are in favor of the thing or not, and together I can use that to say, this is your attitude towards this or that. For instance, I ask you a simple question. What would you want to have for lunch? Fufu or kenke? Right? So I ask, would you want to have fufu for lunch? And you're like, oh, fufu, not really, right? But if I ask you, do you want to have fufu for lunch? You're like, oh yes, of course, why not? A quick answer makes me see that you really love that kind of food. That's your attitude towards it, as compared to when the answer is delayed. Then we can also use implicit attitude measures. And this is where people are unwilling to really show their true feelings about something, or when people want to lie about it. So you ask indirect questions, but to get to the ultimate answers or attitudes towards the thing. For instance, I want to ask you your views about abortion. And immediately you tell me up front that, oh, abortion is a bad thing, when in fact you may have just had one a few days ago, right? So I may not get your true attitude. So the way to go about it, to get to people's true attitudes, is to come in an indirect manner, using implicit attitude measures. So you ask questions that will ultimately lead you to what their true attitudes are without asking the direct questions. Then we say that you can also use non-verbal cues by looking at the physiological indicators, looking out for whether people are smiling, whether people have sweaty palms, whether people have an increased heart rate, or even through the scientific means where in some jurisdictions the brain activity of people is measured. It's like a lie detector test to see what all these physiological changes are, to determine what people's attitudes really are in relation to anything that is being measured. Can you use a person's attitude to predict behavior? For instance, if you tell me abortion is bad, I don't believe in abortion. Can I then predict that if you are faced with an unwanted pregnancy, you will not have an abortion? Can I predict your behavior from your attitude? Yes, under certain circumstances. You can predict people's attitudes to their behavior when the attitude is specific rather than general. So for instance, I ask a question, a specific question that will bring a specific answer that helps to determine the correlation between attitudes and behavior. Again, when attitudes compete, the stronger one is more predictive of behavior than the weaker one, right? So, well, for what do I want to have for lunch? I think I like kenke better than fufu. I like rice better than this. You have a stronger attitude for one than the other. The stronger one is more predictive of what food you are likely to choose for lunch. Then we are again looking at vested interest. When people are faced with two things that they have interest in, they are likely to choose the object that will serve their interest. So for instance, you are thinking of a strike action, right? And you are thinking of, should we go on strike or should we not go on strike? When students go on strike, who benefits? Students, not lecturers. When lecturers go on strike, who benefits? Perhaps lecturers and not students. So in an instance where you are deciding whether to join the strike or not, you would look out for what is in it for you. And often, to determine whether a person's attitude will predict their behavior, look out for vested interests. When you identify any, then you can predict whatever behavior they are likely to exhibit. Then again, you have to consider the time factors and attitude accessibility, the extent, the speed with which people bring attitudes to mind, and the time that people between when they have to exhibit the attitude and act are all indicators to be able to make this determination. So having said all of these, attempt at discussing 5 functions of attitude using real-life examples, illustrative examples. What have we done in this session? We've tried to explain the concept of attitudes. And we say it's an evaluation of an object along a positive or negative light. Whatever evaluation you make will determine the attitude you have towards something. We have looked at the components of attitude and said it has 3 main components: cognitive, cognitive, and affective. Attitude serves several functions. And as our needs change, our attitudes will change. As you sit here, you may have an attitude towards marriage because you are not married. Once you marry, your attitude towards marriage may change, right? And we say that attitudes, again, are not always predictive of behavior. You can only predict a person's behavior from his or her attitude when certain conditions exist. Thank you.